Member.
Blinx the Time Sweeper.
Member.
Polygon Man.
Crash.
Video game mascots are great, aren't they? Can you think of a better way to give your grey, concrete corporate existence a friendly, warm face? There are some absolutely legendary mascots in the world of video games, but none of them match up to our very own mascot here at Cultured Vultures. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about, that guy. Yeah, that one. Gary the three-legged Egyptian mongoose. Aside from Gary, you cannot ignore the behemoths of our industry, with names like Crash Bandicoot, Sonic the Hedgehog and Donkey Kong all having tremendous drawing power in the video game sphere. But for the ultimate mascot, we can look no further than the Italian up a drain pipe himself, Mario. Through decades of marketing, design and quality control, Mario is missing aside, Super Mario is one of the most recognisable mascots not only in gaming but in the world. And we can't ignore the Italian's main rival Sonic. His presence on the Genesis / Mega Drive, the least applicable, helped raise the profile of the console as a whole, as well as boost Sega as a company, helping making them into an international video game monster. Mascots can also bring in extra revenue with t-shirts, toys, lunchboxes, cartoons and even movies. When you bag yourself a smash hit mascot, it isn't only games that'll bring in the ka-ching. However, not everyone can be a Sonic the Hedgehog, Mario the Plumber or Gary the Egyptian Mongoose. Some mascots fail to find an audience in the first place, others fail to keep up with the breakneck pace of video game development and are totally forgotten, and some are just plain rubbish. Hello viewers, it's good to see you. I'm Will from Cultured Vultures and these are 10 forgotten video game mascots. A quick note, we're all hipsters here at Cultured Vultures and have gone out of our way to find forgotten mascots that other websites can't be bothered to research, so don't at me for admitting Bubsy, okay? And while you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe, ring that bell, you'll thank us. Not personally, but you'll thank us. Number 10. Blinx. It's 2002 and the 1990s are becoming progressively smaller in our rear view mirror, but that didn't stop developers creating anthropomorphic animal mascots with attitude. Blinx the Time Sweeper landed on Xbox, and that wasn't a bad fit as the Xbox was a platform that never truly had a proper mascot. Well, aside from Master Chief and that giant green X. Blinx was a vacuum wielding cat who had access to time powers. Blinx could speed up, slow down, reverse or even pause time. He also had the ability to record himself and create a clone. Yet despite some cool mechanics, Blinx the Time Sweeper underwhelmed and received good but not great review scores. A sequel was released 2 years later in the form of Blinx 2 Masters of Time and Space, and that also received fairly mixed reviews. To this very day, Blinx remains a mascot platformer that everyone saw on store shelves but very few seem to have bought. In an age of remakes and reboots, no one, except for our very own Jimmy, is calling for more Blinx, and he is deeply mentally unwell. I guess time travel can help this cat, not even with 9 lives. Number 9. Roland. Back in the old days. No, the older days. No, keep going. Ah, yeah, that's the stuff.
I was there, Gandalf. I was there 3,000 years ago.
You would find a mascot called Roland. He is one of the earliest examples of a mascot being used to sell a system. Roland would appear in various genres of game, appearing in 8 games over a 2-year period from 1984 onwards. Many of these games would be very different. Some were platformers, others were puzzle games, and so on. I suppose if you try each genre, you're bound to find one that works. Right, actually, no, wrong. Amstrad CPC 464 would be a major success in the 80s, and partially by bundling the machine with several games from in-house developer Amsoft. 2 of these games were Roland games, Roland on the Ropes and Roland in the Caves. One possible reason that Roland has been forgotten in the years since his debut is a lack of consistent design for the character. In Roland in the Caves, he's a flea who can jump incredible distances around the cave system. In Roland on the Ropes, he was an Indiana Jones style adventurer. And in Roland Goes Square Bashing, he appears to be kind of like a box, I guess, with arms and legs. I've never played Roland Goes Square Bashing, but I assume it's a game where Roland attacks the heavy-handed games as a service model Square Enix has been trying to force, we should hope. And it didn't help that Roland's games were rarely original. Roland in the Caves and Roland on the Ropes were just merely retitled Spanish games. Other games were simple clones of more popular games. Roland Goes Digging, Roland on the Run, and Roland in Time were merely copies of Space Panic, Frogger and Jet Set Willy. While Roland is fondly remembered by a few Amstrad enthusiasts, modern gaming has forgotten its early attempt at a mascot for the home computer game system. Number 8. Opa-Opa. From the mid-1980s onwards, Sega attempted to find a mascot to push their brand. Before envisioning Sonic the Hedgehog, they had previously tried to create a mascot in the form of Alex Kidd, another forgotten mascot who recently got the remake treatment. But Alex Kidd was not Sega's first attempt to create a mascot. For this, we need to look at the Fantasy Zone series and its protagonist, Opa-Opa. Opa-Opa is a sentient flying spaceship that appeared in 2D side-scrolling shooters which were all the rage in the late 80s. The series featured 3 main releases, Fantasy Zone and Fantasy Zone 2 on the Sega Master System and Super Fantasy Zone appearing on the Sega Genesis in 1992. Apart from the odd virtual console release, Sega has never really entertained the idea of bringing the Fantasy Zone IP back. Opa-Opa does get the odd cameo and has appeared in Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing and Phantasy Star Online. Number 7. Aero the Acro-Bat. 90s gamers may well recall regularly seeing the logo of Sunsoft, who published and developed many games during that period. Sunsoft started in the late 70s and recently announced a comeback. But Sunsoft were at their height in the 1990s and, like many companies of this era, desired to have their very own mascot. Enter Aero the Acro-Bat, an anthropomorphic circus bat full of 90s attitude. Aero the Acro-Bat was a 2D platformer,
which was the style at the time,
in which players had to traverse levels while avoiding and defeating enemies in order to advance the game. It was generally well reviewed and received 2 more games in the series, Aero the Acro-Bat 2 and Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel, both in 1995. And with Saban Entertainment announcing a cartoon series to debut in 1995, the future looked bright for Aero. Sadly, the cartoon series would never go into production, possibly due to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers becoming a major hit and steering Saban in a different direction. Despite great reviews, no new games would be released in the series following Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel, and the character faded into obscurity. A costume called Aero Acro-Bat appeared recently in Balan Wonderworld, which is nice, I guess? However, all may not be lost, as in 2021 Sunsoft tweeted fans to ask if they wanted any of their games to return from the dead, so who knows, maybe Aero will fly again. Number 6. Pitfall Harry.
Just last night, I was lost in the jungle with Pitfall Harry.
Pitfall Harry is one of the earliest examples of a recognizable character in a video game. While this small collection of squares could only be barely described as recognizable, the figure running through jungles and avoiding traps was unmistakable. Pitfall was one of the high-selling Atari 2600 games of all time, shifting over 4 million copies. It was released in 1982 and was followed by a single-season cartoon and a sequel game released in 1984. Super Pitfall would land in 1986 on the NES and was a loose remake of Pitfall 2. It was more of a modern 2D platformer, at least for the time, but was received negatively. Pitfall Harry Jr. would then make his debut in the mid-90s in Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure, and looked similar, yet legally distinct, from Indiana Jones. The Mayan Adventure was well received and sold around 1 million copies. Certainly a respectable sales figure for the 1990s, but nowhere near the height of 4 million copies the original sold. Then Pitfall Harry would face his biggest obstacle yet, the jump to 3D, which should attempt in Pitfall 3D Beyond the Jungle on PlayStation. Despite being voiced by Evil Dead Supremo Bruce Campbell, Pitfall Harry Jr.'s second adventure received fairly mixed reviews. Pitfall's swan song was to be Pitfall: The Lost Expedition. However, once again, reviews were mixed. Sadly, over time, Pitfall's uniqueness faded, and Pitfall Harry wasn't just a strong enough character to keep those middling games moving forward. Number 5. Ristar. Sonic the Hedgehog is one of the most recognizable mascots in gaming, but Sega has always pushed for more. Sega were on a roll, creating characters like Ryo Hazuki, Ai and Ulala, which all represented their brand. Sadly, Ristar wouldn't be joining them. Playing Ristar, you may well notice the levels look very similar to another Sega title, the aforementioned Sonic the Hedgehog. Whereas Sonic's Gotta Go Fast, Ristar is a slower paced affair, allowing players to explore levels and enjoy the gorgeous art style. Ristar is a star that has long limbs that can reach out and grab enemies, pulling them towards him with a headbutt that can blast them into oblivion. Ristar's arms can also help him traverse levels, aiding him across gaps or even climbing. Originally conceived as one of the characters to rival Mario, Ristar wouldn't actually get any other games aside from a very different Sega Game Gear version. Ristar received solid reviews but arrived quite late in the life of the Genesis and fell into the shadow of the 32-bit Sega Saturn. Ristar may be forgotten, but he still lives on, and it was recently released on Nintendo Switch Online. Number 4. James Pond.
I know what kind of man you are.
With Mario taking 2D platformers by storm, every developer and their mother wanted a piece of the pie. Many platform games were released in the 1990s, and it became the go-to for developers looking to make their mark. While many 2D platformers struggled to gain mainstream appeal, James Pond Underwater Agent became a sleeper hit on the Amiga and Genesis and would spawn 2 sequels. James Pond Underwater Agent's unique selling point was the underwater levels mixed in with the standard 2D platforming levels. James Pond, being a fish and all and not having legs, is more naturally at ease swimming through the watery parts of each level, having to hop around on his fins when not in the water. Armed with his bubble gun, he can fire bubbles and trap enemies in order to dispatch them. Underwater Agent was followed up with the even more popular codename Robocod. This entry to the series is probably the one that most people have played, with its memorable catchy music and on-the-nose product placement for Penguin biscuit bars. James Pond 2 was ported to what feels like every platform under the sun and was most recently released on the Nintendo Switch in 2019. The third sequel, Operation Starfish, proved less popular and failed to live up to its predecessor. To my surprise, there was a 2011 smartphone game called James Pond in the Deathly Shallows that I had not heard of before, and I wish I never had. In 2013, a Kickstarter was launched which aimed to create a new James Pond games, one that would simply retcon Operation Starfish. Sadly, the project failed to make a splash and miss its $100,000 goal. It seems that James Pond will remain a forgotten video game fish. Number 3, Kid Klown. Kid Klown is such a forgotten video game mascot there's very little info of him online, at least outside of his SNES release, Kid Klown in Crazy Chase. He made his debut in a game that we had never heard of called Kid Klown in Nightmare World. That's night as in nighttime, mare as in city mare, and world as in, well, world. Rather confusingly, it seems that developer Kemco licensed the character of Mickey Mouse for a game in Japan, but they didn't have the license to release it in the West, so when the game was to be released in the West, they had to reskin Mickey Mouse as Kid Klown. Kid Klown's first dedicated video game would come in the form of 1994's Kid Klown in Crazy Chase. Released for the SNES and later the Game Boy Advance, it featured gorgeous 16-bit pixel art graphics and impressive animation. The gameplay was also unique, which saw Kid Klown take on an obstacle course all viewed from an angled isometric perspective. Despite the unique look, Kid Klown received mixed reviews. Kid Klown in Crazy Chase 2 would be released on the PS1 in Japan in 1996, though it would never make it to the West. We didn't know this game actually existed until researching this video, and very little information exists online, but the graphics, now in 3D, do not compare to its 16-bit counterpart. Kid Klown would make one final appearance in the Bombing Islands before completely fading into obscurity.
I sleep in a racing car, do you?
I sleep in a big bed with my wife.
Number 2, Dizzy. It's hard to describe Dizzy, as it was so unlike many of the other games released in the 1980s. Dizzy was also immensely popular and saw over 16 games being released in a 5-year period. Most of the games were 2D open-world puzzle platformers. Dizzy wore a pair of boxing gloves, and yet the series was devoid of combat, instead the focus being on overcoming the fiendish and sometimes unclear puzzles. Dizzy could only carry a limited number of items, and he'd need to use these items on either NPCs or on other objects in order to progress into new areas of the game. Dizzy's popularity would all but die off in the 1990s, most likely being due to 16-bit consoles making action platformers more popular and puzzle platformers becoming less popular. Dizzy has had a rough time of it in the years following. A PS2 update for the series never got beyond the prototype pitch video, and the Kickstarter for Dizzy Returns only managed to hit 7% of its funding goal. Nevertheless, a number of Dizzy games have been released over the past few years. A remake of Dizzy Prince of the Yoke Folk was released in 2011 for iOS and Android, and the Oliver Twins would release 3 Dizzy games in between 2015 and 2020. Despite this, Dizzy is all but forgotten, aside from a few retro gaming enthusiasts. I guess this is one egg that couldn't be put back together. And number 1, Polygon Man. In the 1990s, every major console had its own mascot. Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, and Sony had Polygon Man.
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean you don't remember him? Well, there is a good reason for that. In years gone past, video games had been seen in much of the same vein as children's toys. Sony wanted to change this, and the branding around the PlayStation was designed to appeal to a more mature audience. But there were internal conflicts within Sony about one major part of the PlayStation project: its name. Sony Computer Entertainment of America hated the name PlayStation. They believed that the console should have been called the PSX, which was the working title for the PlayStation. When Sony of Japan refused to change the name, Sony of America decided to market the PlayStation slightly differently. They invented a mascot solely for the American market and pushed him big time. Marketing featuring Polygon Man would often appear in magazine and featured various quotes from the man himself. One advert featured a quote which read, "More powerful than God." Sony of America was not messing around. Ken Kutaragi, head of PlayStation Global Branding, didn't see Polygon Man until E3 1985 and absolutely hated it. Ken was upset that Sony of America was investing money into alternative branding for the PlayStation, and so Polygon Man was removed and Sony began looking at other mascots. Sony did try a few different characters out in adverts, including Battle Arena Toshinden's Sophia, but settled on Crash Bandicoot. Surprisingly, we hadn't seen the last of the pointy-faced mascot. Polygon Man would make an unexpected return while also making his video game debut as the main villain and overall final boss in 2012's PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. Though reviews weren't as bad as many would have you believe, All-Stars was seen as not much more than a Smash Bros. Knockoff. Servers were shut down in 2018 and the game, as well as Polygon Man himself, has been discarded into the annals of history. No matter which angle you look at it, we'll never see this guy again. You get it? Angle, polygon, and wasted here. That was 10 gaming mascots that people forgot. I forgot about some of them. I didn't forget about others. Is there any that I've forgotten about that you remember? Unlikely, but if there is, let me know. And if you can remember one thing, remember to like and ring the bell and stay subscribed for more great content. I'll see you soon. Goodbye.